Welcome to episode 231 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I've invited a teacher to share how she differentiates parent communication for different family needs and preferences while still setting healthy boundaries for herself. Visit truthforteachers.com to get an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. Planbook has been the established leader in online lesson planning since 2010. In fact, they are the tool that I have recommended for years to members of the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek program. And that's because they offer collaborative lesson sharing, flexible administrator access, and even student view tools for just $15 a year. You can build customized school years, classes, and lessons 100% online, directly inputting class materials and up-to-date standards. Enter code TRUTH at sign-up to join over 800,000 Planbook teachers today. You'll be able to get your first year for only $5 with that code TRUTH. So go to planbook.com. A big thanks also to Scholastic Scope. They are the easy way to keep your middle school ELA lessons fresh and engaging. All year long, your class receives new stories and resources in the format of your choice, print, digital, or both. Your students will love reading Scope's thrilling stories, discovering new genres, watching amazing videos, and writing about everything they've learned. And you'll love that every Scope story and activity builds core ELA skills, from summarizing to synthesizing. Visit scholastic.com/scope to learn more. You can use the code 2021 to save 20%. Did you know that it's possible to get a master's degree for less than $8,000? Check out Midwest Teachers Institute. Their classes are developed by teachers, so they're practical and relevant, with both degree options and individual graduate courses if you just need salary advancement or state recertification. You can get an extra $25 off your first order by visiting midwestteachersinstitute.org/truth. That's midwestteachersinstitute.org/truth. So I'm talking today with Erika Walther. She currently teaches 5th grade language arts and has worked for Baltimore City Public Schools since 2012. While working as a case manager for youth in the juvenile justice system, Erika realized that relationships between students and their school communities were a major indicator for student success. Her conversations with young people working to escape the school-to-prison pipeline inspired her to pursue a career as an educator. I am so impressed by Erika's background and the very human-centered way that she approaches her work, and I'm proud to introduce her here to you as one of the writers for our new Truth for Teachers collective. Even though Erika won't be on the podcast all the time, you will be seeing new articles by her on a quarterly basis at truthforteachers.com. We're talking today about her first article, which is about differentiating communication for students' families and finding ways to build relationships with them while still maintaining healthy boundaries for yourself. We reflect a lot on the specific challenges ahead for families as we enter what is now the 3rd school year that's been impacted by COVID. We begin with a conversation about supporting parents in managing the abundance of new information, policies, and communication that they're receiving from the school. Listen in. I feel like I hear constantly about families who are non-responsive to school messages because they're completely inundated and overwhelmed by them. And I think that was especially true during COVID with just all the changes and remote learning. I mean, parents were saying, I'm getting 4 to 5 emails a day from each of my child's teachers, and I just can't keep up with it. And I know that you've provided some options for families and streamlined some systems that have made it easier for them to stay in the loop without feeling like they're just constantly being bombarded by requests and updates and all these kinds of things. So how has that worked for you?
So this year I learned a lot about differentiating for families like I differentiate for students because we did have that experience right off the bat where, our principal is sending out robocalls and emails and flyers, and we have our school class dojo page, but we also have our personal, individual class pages as well, we've got Google Classroom notifications, and parents get those as well. So it can be a lot. And I noticed about maybe 2 months into the school year, what started off as parents being super into it and super excited about, being a part of what's going on and knowing what's going on, to overwhelmed, because now they're going back to work. If they were not at work, they're going back into their regular routine. And now all of a sudden, all this communication is super overwhelming. So I tried to, when I realized that was happening, back up a little bit, think about what systems were working for which groups of families. And I ended up with pretty much two groups of families. So I had one group of families that was super grateful for just one platform online, whether it's, Dojo or whatever you use. They were always on it. They checked every post. They would read every post, comment, heart it, whatever they wanted to do to interact with it. And then I had another half of my parents that would prefer individual communication from me on a need to know basis, because it was just a lot of things that they didn't really need to know about. So what I did with those parents was I had an individual communication system for them. So I use Google Voice, and that's how I communicate with families. So I would give them that Google Voice number, and we would communicate that way. I had a lovely co-teacher last year who was super into keeping families in the loop as much as I was. And so together we set up a remind system together, so that while I'm texting those individual parents, he had some parents who preferred the remind, so they could click on the link and then go see whatever the resource was. So we attacked it from a few different angles. And I would say by January, February, we were in a flow where we pretty much had all of the parents, except for maybe a couple here and there, on board with what worked for them.
How did you figure out which families fit in which group? Did you ask them in a survey or anything like that?
Yeah, so what we did was we had open houses on Zoom quite frequently. So, like once a month, we would set up a Zoom call that's open. They can join anytime. They didn't have to make an appointment. Let's say it was from 2 to 3, right? They were usually about an hour. So, we would get onto the Zoom and we would invite parents to the Zoom, to talk through any issues that they're having. And around November, we had one where we had a lot of parents come on and let us know that the communication was too much. I also had parents who didn't want to come on, and they texted me or messaged me to let me know they weren't coming on because there was just too much going on. So as we got those messages of this is too much, I'm getting an email from you, I'm getting an email from the other teachers in the building, that was when we said, okay, we're going to go back and we're going to redo this a little bit to meet your needs.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Just to kind of read their cues. And, I'm also thinking about sometimes when I go to unsubscribe from an email list because they're emailing me too much, I'll notice there's an option that says, would you prefer less email? Would you prefer once a month update instead of once a week? Or, maybe like click the topics that you are interested in and we'll just contact you about those things and not the others. So I'm even thinking about how something like that could work where it's almost like parents have an opportunity to tell you how much and what types of communication they want. And then you can feel free to share the minutia of things with the parents who love it and just keep it really like, okay, report card date is this day. And like, our parent conferences, just keep to the really important stuff for the ones who don't. You've really got my mind spinning now about different possibilities for that.
I love that. One thing that we also put in place with a couple of parents, I think it was maybe two or three, in that case where they just wanted specific communication about specific things, is I reached out to them directly and I said, hey, I would like to be able to reach you if there's a super duper emergency. We really need to get a hold of you to let you know about something really important about your child's education. I will only call, whatever number you give me when I absolutely have to speak with you. And that took some trust building, of course, that they trusted that I wasn't going to just, call for, silly things. The assignment was an hour late, things of that nature. But they really appreciated
Right.
it. Then they knew, if I'm calling, if Miss Walther's calling, it's because there's something going on. I'm going to pick up the phone. And I did see that improvement where when I would call, certain families that might not answer, they did start to answer when they saw me calling, because they knew I wasn't calling for something trivial. I was calling for those big things.
Yeah, that's a great tip. What scheduling or boundaries do you follow for yourself so that you're walking that line of being timely, being responsive, differentiating your communication with families, but you're also not checking email at midnight?
Right. So this was a big thing that, it's something that we're all always working on, I'm sure, setting those boundaries and keeping consistent with them. And I know teachers in particular, we're not really good at setting and maintaining boundaries because we feel guilty for doing that.
Hmm.
And that's real. That guilt that we feel is real because a lot of us, I think most of us, internalize that service mentality that we are providing a service. But we have to remember that service is not all inclusive, right? That service is has to be
Mm.
sustainable. And we have to sustain ourselves. So for me, it was a matter of deciding very early in the year when I realized just how much communication this was going to require since we're not in person, um, what my boundaries would be. So I had to fight with myself a little bit because I tend to be the type that likes to get up early, get everything done in the morning, and then be done by, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But during the pandemic, no one else was on that schedule. Everyone else was on a later schedule than I was, including, other teachers, administrators, parents, especially our working parents. They tend not to be able to be as responsive during the day as they are in the late afternoon, early evening. So what I decided to do was I didn't want to
Yeah.
end up doing double work. I didn't want to get up at 6, do 2 hours of work, teach all day, and then do 3 hours of parent contacts. There's no way that was going to be sustainable for me. So I decided that I would push everything I normally do that's work related in the morning. I push that to the afternoon so that if I am using time in the afternoon to communicate with families, just because that's when I'm going to get most of my responses, I'm still not wearing myself out. If I'm giving myself, an hour and a half after school to contact parents, send emails, fill out paperwork, then that is my time and that's when it happens. And when it's 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whatever time you set for yourself, whatever time I set for myself that week, then I'm done. And whatever wasn't done that day, it's going to have to be followed up on the next day. And that's a constant cycle in my head. I'm constantly fighting that guilt to be available with I have to take care of myself, especially this year and moving forward into the years to come.
Right. How do you balance the need for consistency and for honoring your own boundaries with the need to make exceptions for certain situations or for emergencies?
Sure. So again, that consistency piece is really key because I'd say 90 to 95% of families will respect your boundaries from the jump. You're
I
only
agree.
going to have to massage that a little bit with a couple of families here and there, right? And that can be an individual conversation for sure. So there are some families, and last year I think I had about three that throughout the year they would have, a crisis here with housing or education access, technology access, where they were very upset, they were very stressed, and they wanted a response from someone right now. And often that someone is the teacher because who's going to answer their phone at 8 o'clock at night? Probably the teacher, right?
Yeah.
So when you set that boundary very early that you are not available to answer your phone after a certain time, for me, it's usually 7. That's usually when I shut it down and I don't take any calls whatsoever. Families will get the hang of that and they'll respect that. And over time, you'll see that you know, they'll get used to it with you and they'll support you with it. And they understand for the most part. They don't want to be bombarded all day either. So they completely understand once you set that. I find that when you're consistent, it goes a lot better than when you start making exceptions for everyone early in the year. Now that way, when you do have to make an exception, it's clear to everyone in the conversation. I understand that this is an emergency. I'm making this exception for you because I want to make sure you're safe and taken care of. And those are the emergencies. Are you safe and taken care of, right? If it's not a safety issue, it is not an emergency. And then another strategy I use for those emergency situations, because I can't guarantee that I'm available. I might have my own stuff going on and I might not be available when an
Right.
emergency pops up to be that person for a family. And it doesn't have to be that I'm having an emergency. It could be that I'm not emotionally able to take on this family's situation at this time. And that's important to recognize. We are not superheroes. We are not superhuman. We are allowed to have days where our capacity for other people's problems and other people's stress and strife, we just don't have it. So what I do
Yes.
for some families is I make sure they have some sort of emergency number that's not me, right? The social worker, the school, lots of different school districts have their own crisis phone numbers that parents can reach out to. This year, we had a whole tech support hotline just for our district's students. So providing families with those phone numbers early and let them know, if you cannot reach me, please call these numbers, right? My assistant principal, she is really fantastic at, kind of offering herself up as that person in the middle. If I'm not available, I know that I can tell my families, hey, call Miss So-and-so, and they will do that because we have that trust that if we're all on the same team, whoever I refer you to, because I'm not available, they will be able to help you out.
How do you handle parents who are deeply frustrated about an aspect of their child's schooling? Are there ways to make parents feel heard and understood without feeling like you're just the sounding board for all their venting and anger and letting them unload on you?
Absolutely. So this was something that it took me a few years to learn, but I'm so
I
glad that
bet.
I have learned it because, as a new teacher in any district, I'm sure any new teachers can relate to this. You are terrified when those parents call you and they sound upset, right? You are just
Yes.
shaking in your boots or your Uggs, whatever you're wearing. And it takes a while to work through that. It's anxiety because as a first year teacher, let's be honest, you still don't feel like you know what you're doing to begin with. And then to have parents come in and questioning you, it can be a whole response. So I found after 3, 4 years in the classroom, I was still having that anxiety response when families would reach out with an issue because it was almost, I don't want to say a trauma response, but it was a trigger response. It was an automatic response when a parent would call about an issue and they're upset. Now I'm upset. So I had to work on my response to that situation, right? So I know when a parent is calling me with an issue, I repeat this sentence in my head about 3 times before I answer the phone. This is not about me. This is not about me. This is not about me, right? So once I
Yes.
internalize whatever this conversation is, it's not about me, then I'm more prepared to take that call. Now, once I have the parents on the line, there's a few things I do that help keep that conversation productive because I know we're all aware that that can get really unproductive
Mhm.
really quickly. I can't count how many parents broke down on the phone with me in the last year, not because, necessarily academics, but just the stress that we were all under. Everybody, teachers, parents, students, we were all doing the best that we can, right? And the emotions were high. So when parents would call me because they're frustrated with a grade or, their child is struggling to keep up with work or complete work at all, I start with validating. I let them know I hear you. I know that this is really tough. I know that this year is not ideal. We let them know as often as we can that we understand that there's a lot going on. And we understand there's going to continue to be a lot of pressure as we come out on the other side of this pandemic. Folks have been out of work. Folks have lost months of income. Folks have lost housing. Families have lost health care. They've lost access to other family members. They've lost family.
Mhm.
There's going to be a lot of trauma and grief and stress that we're going to be dealing with for, I would say, at least the next few years. It's
Yeah.
not just going to go away just because we reopen. So I validate parents' experiences. I make sure they know that I hear them. I make sure they know that I understand. And when I am listening to them talk, I'm listening for what their concern is. And if I can't tell, I'll ask them, what are your concerns for your child? What are you noticing? What do you try to do at home? Okay, here's what I would try if we were in person. How can we help you put this in place while your child's at home with you? And conversely, as we go back into the building, we're anticipating a lot of conversations about our students' academic progress, right? We're going to be doing all of those assessments to see where our students are with their current levels of performance, right? And I anticipate a lot of high stress conversations coming as parents realize the academic effects that the pandemic has had.
Mhm.
And what's going to be key there is validating their concerns about their children's progress, but then moving immediately into, okay, what can we do as a team to move your child, to help your child be successful? And here's what I can try in the classroom. And I do things in cycles. I say things like, okay, I'm going to take little Johnny in a small group, 3 times a week for 10 minutes. We're going to do these sight words. And then I will call you in 2 weeks and let you know how many sight words he was able to remember after 2 weeks. And we check in and we make a date. We make a plan to check in after 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is about that child's progress. Once they know that I'm willing to put a plan in place, that I'm willing to be consistent with checking in with them and letting them know, then that eases a lot of that tension later on. So when we do follow up, if there is an issue, maybe they want to have some assessments done to see if something's going on. Maybe they want to talk about some modifications. We're better able to have those conversations because they know that I'm doing my half. They're more willing to come with their half of the work as well.
I feel like that also really addresses the sense of helplessness that so many of us have had over, since the beginning of the pandemic. Just there's so many things out of our control. And for certain personality types, especially grasping for anything that we have influence over makes a difference. And I can imagine that for many parents, just knowing, okay, I have a teacher who sees the problem, is not denying it, who cares deeply about my child, who cares about our family, who is responsive to what we've experienced and is doing this thing. Is this one thing that this teacher is doing for my child going to fix everything? No, but they're putting in an effort. And here is something actionable that the teacher is doing on a regular basis and something I can do. Here's an actionable step for me to feel like I have this little bit of influence to make sure that I'm not dropping the ball. Because I think every parent's greatest fear is I'm not doing everything that I should for my kid, that I'm not advocating for my kid and giving them all the best possible opportunities.
Absolutely. That's very real. We make it a point in the way that we do parent conferences at our school. We have a whole format that we follow. And the most important piece of that format is letting parents know what they can do at home to support their children, whether it's working on sight words, whether it's getting them logged into those asynchronous applications, right? Whatever it is, we make sure we discuss that explicitly with each and every parent at each and every parent conference so that they do get a little bit of that power back because it can be really defeated. But another thing that I've observed and that's been brought to my attention by some really fantastic colleagues, both in my town but also around the country, that we check in every so often, is we had this conversation recently about parents who feel uncomfortable stepping into what they view as our wheelhouse or our world, so to speak. So sometimes, a parent who might be less responsive than other parents or less vocal when there's an issue than other parents doesn't mean they're not concerned. It means that they might feel uncomfortable making suggestions. They view us in some cases as more of an expert than we realize, and they expect us to come up with the answer. So when they talk to us and we're asking them for answers, sometimes that can be a little disarming for some parents. So we want to keep that in mind as well, to let parents know that the reason I'm asking you for your input is because we are a team and we're going to get the most success and meaningful gains out of your children if we're working on this together.
That's a really nice approach for those parents who are less responsive, because I feel like sometimes the tendency is to say, well, these families just don't care. They're not returning my phone calls, or they don't show up, or I tell them to do something and they don't do it. So they just don't care. And this is one of the hills that I'm willing to die on. I've said this, I don't know how many times on the podcast. I will keep saying it. Every family cares. Every family is doing the best they can. For some of them, their best, honestly, is probably not good enough. But I know I certainly have days when my best is not good enough either. Like we're all working at varying levels, and understanding that there are, I would imagine maybe 0.01% of parents wake up in the morning and actively work to do harm toward their child and purposefully do things that with the intention of creating negative outcomes. That's just not what we're dealing with. With the vast majority of families, they have the best of intent toward their kid. They are doing the best they can with everything else on their plate. And I think coming at it from that perspective is so important, because it gives us humility. It gives us compassion. It keeps us from coming from a place of judgment and instead easing into this space of curiosity. What else is going on here that I don't know about? What do I not understand about this situation? What else could be true besides they just don't care? And I think the one possible suggestion, or the one possible reason for that you just gave, was that a lot of parents are intimidated about coming into school. They maybe didn't have a great school experience themselves. Maybe they didn't graduate from high school. Maybe they had a teacher one time who really made them feel dumb. Maybe another one of their child's teachers really just had a communication style that did not work with this family, and now they are just like ready to fight on everything. And so I think really getting curious about that is important and not just immediately concluding, they're not doing things the way I want them to. They just don't care. What would you say about that?
So I get this one a lot. I hear it a lot. And every time I hear a teacher say in a meeting or in a training, this parent doesn't care, or what about when the parents don't care, or, things of that nature. And it strikes a chord with me because I know in my heart that all of our parents care about their children, about our students. Um, and this year, especially, hopefully, I'm hoping, has made it clear to folks that we are all doing the best we can. And some days our best might not be your best, right? But it's my best today, my personal best. And that's all I can do is be my personal best in that day with what I'm working with. And it's the same for parents and families.
Mm-hmm.
They're also doing the best they can, trying to navigate everything that has changed, everything that's going to continue to change. And we have to be aware of that. Sometimes I shut down. Guess what? A parent is allowed to shut down
That's
too
right.
and just want everything to just stop for a minute. I had an experience this year where, I had some mental health things going on, and I let my principal know I was going through some mental health issues, and I had to take some time to deal with that and get that together before I could come back. I'm not going to answer my phone during those 2 or 3 days or however long it is. Guess what? Parents might be going through the same thing where they just don't have the capacity for it and they just need a minute. That might just so happen to be the day you set it aside to call them. But you have to keep in mind that we're all in our own places. So just because I'm available on Thursday at 3 doesn't mean that it's right for me to expect you to be available, not just physically available, but mentally and emotionally available for those conversations as well. And one thing my principal said to us when we were about to come back for in person for the last little bit of the semester, it really hit me. We cannot write off our students. We cannot write off our students. And when she said it in such a way that I shook inside. I felt this shake go through my body because she's 1000% right. We cannot write off those families that we don't always hear from. We cannot write off those families that we haven't seen since the pandemic began. It's this constant journey of I want to make sure that every student on my roster is safe and taken care of. And this past year, especially, I had 2 students that struggled to get into the groove of online learning, for whatever reason. And it was to the point where I got permission from my principal to look for those families on social media just to make sure they were okay, to make sure that the children were okay, that they were safe, that they were doing all right. And I'll tell you, I've never connected with a parent that I haven't heard from in a few weeks or even all school year. I've never been in a situation where I finally get them on the phone and they're angry. If anything, they are so grateful and they voice that they are grateful that I care enough about their children to do all that just to make sure that they're okay. I'm not doing all that work because I want them to turn in an assignment. I'm doing all that work because I want to make sure that they're safe and that they're okay. And once parents know that that's my intention, a lot of that anxiety goes away. A lot of that distrust goes away, right? So it's just so key to not make those assumptions. We have to let those assumptions go. We have to put a little bit of trust into the families that they're doing the very best they can with what they've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good strategy. Erika, this is absolutely wonderful. You've given great tips that just feel so grounded and just a real compassionate way of teaching and really like caring about families and wanting to differentiate for them and show up as the person that they need you to be in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't require you to spend, an unsustainable amount of time. I wonder what's the most important thing that you want teachers to take away from this conversation and remember as they think about building relationships with families this year?
I want teachers to remember that family engagement, like anything else that we do, is a process. And it's a process through which you have to be authentic and you have to be consistent from the very beginning of the school year. So you have to take that time on the front end to strategically plan for your family engagement, just like you plan your units, just like you plan your routines and procedures for the first 2 weeks of school. Part of your planning for those first 2 weeks should involve how you're going to connect with families and how you're going to build a relationship with families. We talk so much about building relationships with our students, but we don't talk as much about building relationships with their families so that when there is a problem or when there is a concern, we're already a team. We don't have to do that work in the middle of November or December when things are absolutely completely stressful. We already have that, and we can roll with the punches a little bit better. So that's what I want teachers to keep in mind. You need to make sure that families know you care in an authentic way. But caring does not mean sacrificing your mental health, your physical health, your well-being, right? Those boundaries are how you take care of yourself. That does not mean that you can't extend care to your family.